because this is now a conversation on this alone. But I wanted to highlight that along with other central banks, the RBA is going down the same route. Once again, we are following other central banks around the world, and I argue that central banks don't think in isolation. They're very much linked back through the Bank for International Settlements. And what we'd find in Australia and elsewhere is we get the same sorts of policies being propagated as came out from the Federal Reserve and other places first. So, we're just following.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we touched on before, maybe take some of those record profits and increase your reserves and make the banks steadier. But no, the banks are the ones that never lose out.
Well, and of course, the banks are highly exposed to derivatives and highly exposed to trading and those sorts of things. So, the meat and potatoes banking has got lost in the maze here. And unfortunately, the regulators around the world don't want to actually tackle those fundamental issues. They don't want to actually make the banking system safer, despite the fact they say they do. So there's a real issue.
All right, so the digital ID, we've both been talking and tweeting a lot about this, and this was all stuff that was conspiracy theory even just 5 years ago when we said, and now here it is on our doorstep being passed through the Senate. So one more step to go, but what are your thoughts on all this, Martin?
Well, of course, two things. Firstly, you and I have been talking about if you join the dots between central bank digital currencies, digital ID, and the banking system, you've got much more control. And of course, there are people who've been advocating for this in the context of don't use cash anymore. We want to track all transactions. We want to be able to give people credit scores and those sorts of things, and also social scores. And there are other countries around the world more advanced. Unfortunately, Labour's now basically rammed this through the Senate. And there wasn't sufficient debate, wasn't any debate really about this. And, news.com.au saying dystopian. That's probably not far off the mark. But of course, the Labour guys are saying, oh, no, nothing to see here. Let's move on. I'm quite concerned about this. And I think there's a really important lobbying exercise now to be done with the lower house. This has got to come back to the lower house because of some of the changes. They haven't dealt with the fundamental question here. And I'm very concerned about the idea of a digital ID, although in theory being voluntary. But in actual fact, it becomes, if you don't have a digital ID, you can't do stuff. And that's the problem. So you get to the point where you are forced to do it. And then those who would prefer to be able to control things more can join the dots. And so I'm very concerned about this. I think it's a civil liberties issue. It's a freedom issue. And it's a question of where do we want to go? And I use the analogy of the frog in the hot water. Over the years, more and more of our freedoms have been taken away. We've ended up with a top-down controlling mentality coming from those in power, and this is just one more step.
Yeah, time for more decentralisation, Martin, if you believe privacy is a basic human right. And we've all heard that word voluntary too many times over the past few years, and we all know how that played out.